Hey everyone, today I'm creating 33 cards using the Doodlebug Designs Pumpkin Spice paper pad. I'm also using the Call Me Crafty SheetLoad of Card template from April 2024. This is my second video. I'm part of the collaboration team and I've released one already. I will put a link to that in the top corner here if you want to check that out, as well as in the description below. The first time I used the sketch, I actually altered the dimensions, and for this one, I'm using it as the sketch is laid out, with the exception of using a rectangle in the center of the card instead of the oval you can see on the original sketch. So the first thing I did is I sat down and I drew out a few squares and worked out how many of the elements that I need for the card I can cut from each piece of paper. So what's the most economical way to cut up each sheet, especially considering I'm planning on using the entire paper pad for my cards today. Now, because a lot of these papers are super busy, I wanted to separate them into piles of, a really, busy design versus some of these neutrals. So the gingham and then some of the dots, and then there's, I think, a couple that have some wheat and different things on them. They are a lot easier to include in a card without adding too much busyness. So that was step one. The other thing that I did is anything that had pumpkins or anything to do with kind of Thanksgiving. We don't have Thanksgiving in Australia, so it wouldn't really make sense for me to highlight that. So I did use the opposite side in those instances. Now I'm going through, and because I have 3 pattern papers, or up to 3, for some of them you'll see later I only use 2, I put them in piles together in groups so that when I cut them down, I can try and make sure that I keep the designs together that I know will work well. And you can see here, look, normally I do loads of planning and I know exactly what I'm going to cut down, what's going to go with what. In this instance, I actually kind of threw my plans out a little bit and decided that any papers that I thought would work for the backing panel, which is 5.5 by 4, I would run through and cut those down first, and then get 2 of these small elements that are 3 by 2 that I'm going to layer on the front of the card. And I didn't do that with the right proportion of the paper. So you'll see a little bit later that I do use some craft cardstock and some other colors for that 5.25 by 4 inch backing panel. If you wanted to stretch your beautiful pattern papers further, you could cut all of your backing panels out of cardstock. I do that quite regularly, but I've decided that it does make loads and loads of cards, and sometimes maybe using the beautiful paper to have more paper per card is a good balance. So 33 cards today, otherwise I probably would have made 50 or 60. Okie doke. So I'm running through and cutting them down, and here you can see I'm lining up the pattern paper for the split rectangle at the back, the small rectangle on the front, and then in some instances, either pattern paper or coloured cardstock for that backing layer. I had a whole bunch of different colours in my stash, and I managed to match up these really bright yellow, the bright blue, and then I do think there is some brown that was out of that as well. I'm not too sure. So I'm lining them all up. I switch them around, and at this point, once I've done this step, I actually don't change which pattern paper lines up with which backing panel. I put them all in a pile, and then I get into my flow of doing bulk card making, and I'm going to do a whole series of layering, so doing white borders around these. And I simply just attached it with some liquid glue or my ATG. I use different ones depending on the size of the paper and the mood I was in. And then I ran through, attached them all to these scraps of white. And then when I run through and trim them, I do it card by card. So you can see here I'm cutting them down in pairs, where I've got the 2 by 3 inch with a matting layer, and then this one here is 3 by 3, and I'm cutting it in half. Now I keep those 2 pieces together because they're going to go on the same card, so I'm very careful not to muddle them up, because if you cut them slightly differently, then they will look like a terrible match, and they will really be a distraction on the card. So that would be a definite tip. Now, often when I'm doing this style of card where there's a gap between, I will put some cardstock in between or some scraps so that there's no noticeable dip. For these ones, I didn't do that, and honestly, you really can't tell. So I think the pattern paper from Doodlebug, and then because I was using thin white paper, not cardstock, it meant that there wasn't really a big dip, and it didn't detract from the cards at all. So if you do that, then I think it creates a bit more stability for the card, but I have not found that it's 100% necessary. Once all of these were put together, so I've essentially created the entire card design with the exception of embellishing, I did pull out some pumpkin spice packs. So I have, I think, the odds and ends and the ephemera, and I will link these below. If they're still available, I'll put some links so that you can find them nice and easily. I'm now sorting through the cards and just kind of laying them all out so I can see the color combinations and designs. My absolute favorites were the ones with the little owls on them. They were absolutely super cute. So I sorted through, actually maybe this is called Chit Chat. I think this is the one with all of the sayings in it. Now a lot of them were really related to Thanksgiving, or a lot of them were puns, which I've mentioned before is not my favorite. So I've pulled out any that I think I would ever use on a card and put the rest back in the pack. It's a very full pack. So I have put that into my donation pile so that someone else can get some joy out of it. And then I'm going through, I think this is the odds and ends, and basically everything in here is usable. It's very, very cute. Lots of trees and flowers and little critters. So I ran through and I sorted all of these out on my desk. And what I was looking for when I was going through was the owls. Like in particular, I wanted to make these really cute cards with the little owl yellow and blue paper and complete those first. So one of them is there and good to go. The other owl, there was only two, was hiding amongst that mix of smaller items there from the pack. And so I had to kind of dig around and find it a little bit later. But the first thing I did was this owl card. And I did turn this one into a thank you card with a little speech bubble. And then as I sorted through, I just worked through whatever made sense at the time. So I think I put the owl cards out of the way and I come back to them. But then I worked through everything else and then did those last. And I had my little pile of complete cards up on the right-hand side. So here's where I was much more organized. I put all the little coffee ones together and the donuts and then the little critters. And it made it super quick when I was running through and creating these cards. And I really did just pick up whatever inspired me. So these little donuts, they match absolutely perfectly with the donut pattern paper. So I thought I'll make 2 of those and they will be absolutely loved, I am sure. And then I just worked through the list. I think I do a couple with the coffee cups next. And for me, when I'm creating these styles of cards, I try and stretch my ephemera where possible, but I also want to make sure the card has enough interest. So with this one and just putting the one donut, that kind of made sense because of the size of the element. And then similar with these little leaves. But when I got to things like the coffee cups, I did them in pairs. So I had either a cup of tea with a cup of coffee or 2 cups of coffee with different pattern paper design. And I think they turned out super, super cute. With this one here and the leaves, I did try and find something that would match with what is one of the busiest backgrounds. So that's really an autumn paper, or a fall if you're in the US, paper. And they were the ones that I was a bit worried about matching things with. So I started with the hardest ones first while I had the biggest list of options to put with them. And I just finished saying that I put 2 coffee cups onto each card, and that is not correct. So with these ones, these takeaway cups or takeout cups are really big. So I only used 1 with these. But when I got to the coffee mugs, I should have said, those I did put 2 per card. There was nothing too tricky about doing this one. If you're using the pattern paper and then the ephemera from the same collection, all the colours match absolutely beautifully. For me, it was about trying to pick something that would stick out enough from the background. And when I was doing the initial layouts, so when I was picking which papers would go where, I did try and make sure that the 2x3 paper, where possible, was not too busy. It's just that if I used it by the 5 1/4 by 4 for the matting layer, then the piece that was left meant I had 2 of those for the front of 2 other cards. So I hope that makes sense, but I just made the best of it and tried not to overthink it too much, to be honest. If you are enjoying the video, it would be fantastic if you could hit the like button. That is how YouTube knows that you're enjoying it, and it will help it share to more viewers. So thank you so much for doing that. Here I've got my tractors, and again, these are pretty quick. You will notice a little bit earlier I had a little box full of sentiments. That is my box of happy birthday sentiment stamps. not stamps, happy birthday sentiments. And I have just pulled out a couple of different sizes. So there's some squares, there's some bigger rectangles and some little mini rectangles. And I tend to find that depending on what I'm embellishing the card with, there is always the perfect size if you have, 2 or 3 different options to pick from. So that would be a really good time saver if you are trying to do some cards in bulk, and maybe you're doing something similar to this where you are using up an entire paper pad in one go. I do actually wonder, does anyone actually do that? Do you ever sit down for a really big project and use an entire paper pad in one go? Or is it more that you like to watch videos when people do, just to get some inspiration or ideas for when you make maybe cards as part of a smaller project? Maybe put a comment below and let me know. Do you ever use a full paper pad at once? And I don't mean in one crafty session, I mean for one crafty project. I'm now working through with a lot of the critters. So these bears do take up a lot of the card and a lot of the design. But then again, similar with the little coffee cups. With the smaller critters, I tried to figure out who I would pair up. So not all of them am I going to put 2 on a card, but I tried to put 2 that looked like they were, complementary to each other. And in some instances, that was 2 that were a similar size, like the 2 on the right. And in others, I did kind of a furry friend and then his little friend. So on the left-hand side, you can see that super cute little mouse. With these little banner sentiments, with the first one, I felt like I put it a little bit too high up. And maybe what I should have done is put it further down the rectangle, just because they're kind of popping up off the top of the rectangle, which is supposed to be where you draw your eye to the middle of the card. And I feel like if it was lower down, they would have just been balanced a little better. So you'll notice with this one, I put probably half the amount of pattern paper below the sentiment strip. And then that just means that I guess it's a little bit more balanced. It's not a big deal. People will not notice. But when I'm working through, I'm constantly thinking about, what would I do differently? And did that look okay? And I try not to fuss too much to make everything perfect, because I do make a lot of cards and I want to get through some of the volume. But as I'm going, I'm constantly thinking about if I could do it differently or if that worked well and I would want to do it again. In terms of thinking about what I do differently, I guess I do that for a couple of reasons. One is it helps me with these voiceovers, and it is genuinely quite hard to talk. You feel like you're doing a monologue for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, which is why most of my videos are sort of 8 to 12 minutes, because it's an easier time frame to give people hints and tips without feeling like you are talking for too long and making everybody bored. But the tips and tricks are helpful, so I think about that. But then also I do quite frequently reuse a sketch, not normally 2 weeks apart from each other like I have with this one. And I do think I'll end up using this one again and again. But I'm wondering if I should go back to a lot of the earlier SheetLoad sketches. So before I started using the sketches, there was quite a few that I have downloaded and not used yet. So should I do a bit of a retro and use up some of my paper pads by using some of those older sketches? I'm always thinking that if I grab a sketch that looks tricky to use, then that might be a fun one to try out, because generally I can try and make it work, even if I need to tweak the sketch a little bit to make it a little bit more my style. But again, let me know down below, going back to the older sketches, would that be helpful? I'm pretty sure they're still available for people to download, so I will double check that before I start using them. I think it would be a bit tricky if I started using them and they were not available for you, but I will double check. There's over 50 sketches, so there are plenty that I have not used yet. And given that a lot of people seem to love using pattern paper and working through their stash, it does seem like a good way that I can create some more videos that will be of interest. At this point, I'm using up a lot of the smaller items. Well, not really. So I decided I wanted to use the sun, and I've put that up in the top right corner. And the best way to balance a big element is often with a triangle, so 2 smaller elements, which is why I've put the plants and the little, I think it's a ladybug. Now I'm moving on to using up the rest of the critters, and I've got, again, a little critter and a big critter. And then because I don't have a sentiment along the bottom of the card, I've actually started using some of the speech bubbles. And so they are very, very cute and really, really fun to use. You do need to be a little careful with them though, because, not careful, but the speech bubble has the little speech bubble bit at the bottom, and you need to make sure you're lining that up with where the critter's facing so that you're not making it look like he's talking out the back of his head. So for those, I do figure out the speech bubble first and then how I can put the little elements around it to make sure the little talking bubble part is coming from the right place and placement on the card itself. At this point, I think I'm getting pretty low on, oh gosh, here we go. Okay, I was going to say we're getting really low on cards, but no, there are still more. 33 is a lot of cards. And here I am with these super cute owl, which is the one I was looking for at the beginning of the video. So I now have 2 of those that are completed. And then I went a little rogue, I guess. I could not work out what to put on top of these other owl pattern papers, so I put the fox. So why not? Hopefully an owl and a fox can be friends. So the 2 of these look exactly the same, and I'm not sure actually if the foxes are exactly the same, are they? No, one is asleep and one is awake. So they do look very similar though, and they are the right size to take up the front of a card, which works really nicely. You might have noticed just before I finished that second card that instead of putting the fox directly in the middle, I did offset it to the left a little bit. Again, that was just me trying out a way to make the card look a little bit more interesting and a little bit less like it's just a card with, something popped in the middle and a sentiment directly underneath. I like it. I think it worked out pretty well. Now, at this point, I'm trying to figure out, am I going to put anything on top of these cute little owl papers, or are they cute enough to stand on their own? There was not anything that was a logical choice to go with an owl, so I focused on doing the sentiments, and then I tried a few things, and I decided, you know what, I'm just going to leave them how they are, and they're going to be amazing. I have put a video here that I think you might enjoy. Have a great day.